Hello, everyone, and welcome back for part two of my Gucci series. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Lollie, and I make videos about fashion designers as well as fashion houses now, too. I talk about how they're created, I talk about the designer's work, their lives, and everything else in between. So, if you like fashion in any sort of way, this video and my videos in general are here for your enjoyment. So, welcome. This is part two of my Gucci series, and by the end of this video, we will be about halfway through the series, which I almost can't believe because even by the end of this video, we will still have so much left to talk about. It's absolutely just pure insanity. Uh, but in part one, we talked about Gucci's beginnings. We talked about Gucci, his sons Aldo, Vasco, and Rodolfo. We also discussed how Aldo Gucci was able to build up Gucci's celebrity cachet through the 60s and 70s. And we introduced Maurizio Gucci and his wife Patrizia. And I think we ended talking about Paolo Gucci, who, in my opinion, is really the catalyst in this whole debacle. So we really set everything up for what will become the most turbulent period of Gucci's long history. And today we are going to be talking about most of it. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's just get into it. Part one ended with us talking about the Gucci men getting older. How Aldo Gucci, preparing for the remainder of his life, decided to give each of his three sons a 3.3% of his 50% stake in Gucci. And this move made his brother Rodolfo angry and jealous for more. Because just like Aldo's son Paolo, his brother Rodolfo didn't have enough. Whatever he had wasn't enough. He wanted everything his older brother Aldo had and more. It wasn't enough that his only son Maurizio would receive his 50% stake in Gucci. And it wasn't enough that he had money. He had everything that he wanted. But he wanted things that didn't belong to him. In 1972, Aldo Gucci had created Gucci Perfumes, which was a separate entity from Gucci with Aldo's sons as board of directors. And that's because when Gucci Perfumes was created, Vasco and Rodolfo had no interest in Gucci Perfumes. They wanted no part in any venture that could possibly go wrong or have them lose money. So Aldo assumed the entire risk of expansion and only gave them each a 20% stake in the company. And when Vasco died, his shares went back to Aldo and his sons. However, throughout the years, Gucci Perfumes became so successful that it started generating more money than Gucci, and that angered Rodolfo. He had made a mistake. He now wanted a 50% stake in Gucci Perfumes because he wanted more money and control. He wanted to ensure that his only son would inherit more when he passed. So he hired lawyer Domenico Desolé to help him incorporate Gucci Perfumes into Gucci to get him a 50% stake in the company. And with Domenico Desolé by his side, Rodolfo wasn't worried. Domenico Desolé is an Italian lawyer who was brought into the Gucci fold by mere chance. He was invited by another colleague to sit in on one of Gucci's boardroom meetings in Milan, and it was there that he sat reading a newspaper for most of it, because he wasn't interested or fazed by the glamorous Gucci family. It was only once the family started fighting and talking over one another, which they normally did, that Domenico Desolé stepped in. He interrupted Aldo Gucci and told him to wait his turn, and that turned the room silent. Everyone in that room was shocked. No one had ever stepped up to Aldo Gucci. No one had ever interrupted him. And here was this random man who just did. After that boardroom meeting, Rodolfo brought Domenico Desolé into the fold to help him work on Gucci Perfumes. Because while Rodolfo didn't have the balls to stand up to his older brother Aldo, Domenico Desolé did. Rodolfo knew Desolé was going to get him what he wanted, and that was to incorporate Gucci Perfumes into Gucci to get him a 50% stake in the company. And that motion just had to pass boardroom approval. And this is where Aldo's mistake would lead to his downfall, because the boardroom now included his sons, Roberto, Giorgio, and Paolo. This was good news for Rodolfo, though, because all he had to do was find the weak link. And that's what made Aldo nervous. So he went to his sons to ensure that they would veto this power move by Rodolfo. And unsurprisingly, Paolo refused. He voted to incorporate Gucci Perfumes into Gucci, giving his uncle Rodolfo a 50% stake in the company, and essentially sticking his nose up at his father. And this is where everything truly turned sour. Because just like Rodolfo, Paolo wanted more money, more power, more control. And I don't know what made this man think that by going against his own father, it would help his case or make his father pity him in some way. But it did none of those things. In fact, after his little rebellion, Aldo had a gift of his own for Paolo, the gift of unemployment and his removal from the company. But Paolo Gucci wasn't done either. Because he was fired, he sued his family for wrongful termination,
and then secretly launched his Gucci Plus line under his own name, Paolo Gucci. But you have to remember, as much as Paolo Gucci had this audacity, he was also an idiot. He launched his illegitimate company in secret and then tried to contact the same suppliers as Gucci. He tried to hire the same people that worked for Gucci to make clothes for his secret illegitimate business. And of course, Rodolfo found out about this. So he informed the rest of the family, and they banded together to contact every single Gucci supplier to inform them that if they did business with Paolo Gucci, they would be dropped by Gucci and blacklisted forever. Obviously, the suppliers were scared, so they dropped Paolo because they did not want to be dropped by Gucci and they did not want to be blacklisted. And you would think this would have stopped Paolo, but it didn't. Nothing ever seems to stop Paolo. He just came up with another plan, and that plan was Haiti. He wanted to manufacture his clothes in Haiti as he already had some connections there from when he made and sold his own Gucci counterfeits. Yes, I said that correctly. You really can't make this up. I almost wish I were making this up. It would feel a little less pathetic if I were making this up, but I'm not. Paolo Gucci was making Gucci counterfeits and selling them. And you could even consider his own illegitimate business to be counterfeits as well. It was truly a madhouse. Around the holidays of 1981, Aldo Gucci reached out to Paolo to try and make amends, to get him to stop trying to make his own Gucci Plus line happen. And it did seem like Aldo managed to convince Paolo to come back. He agreed to hire Paolo on as a VP at Gucci, and even said that he would create a new division formed under Gucci Perfumes called Gucci Plus, that Paolo would be creative director of, and given the rights to design and promote products under his own name. And it seemed like a good deal, so Paolo agreed. Later, he would learn that all of his designs under Gucci Plus would have to be pre-approved by Rodolfo, which meant that they were never going to be approved. And by March 1982, Paolo and Rodolfo were fighting constantly. And by June, he was fired again. And by July of 1982, the entire Gucci family would convene for what is now the infamous Gucci boardroom meeting, a meeting that shook the entire world. And I'm not exaggerating. It shook the world of the 1% who saw Gucci as their secret club. And I've seen varying reports on this entire meeting, but basically this boardroom meeting started like any other. Aldo sat at the head of the table with Roberto on the right and Rodolfo on the left. Maurizio sat on the other side of the table with Giorgio and Paolo, and Domenico Desolé sat off to the side taking the minutes for the meeting. And right after Aldo opened this meeting, Paolo immediately interjected, saying, "I want to say that as a director of this company, I have been denied any opportunity to see or go through any of the company's books or documents. I want my position clarified before we go any further." And nobody seemed to really care or listen to him. The room erupted with shouts of disapproval because no one wanted to talk about him. They had business to discuss, they had things to talk about, and so they moved on. But this didn't stop Paolo. He just kept trying to interject and get his point across, and they kept ignoring him. And at one point, he got fed up, and he asked them straight out, who are the two mysterious shareholders in Hong Kong who are receiving money from the company? And it was at that point that Paolo noticed Domenico Desolé had stopped taking the minutes. Basically, he stopped writing down a record of the meeting, and Paolo turned to question him, saying, "Why aren't you writing down my questions? I demand to have a record of this meeting." And this is where events get a little murky. Some say the room went silent, and in that silence you could start to hear a faint clicking sound coming from Paolo's jacket pocket. Others say that Paolo whipped out a tape recorder from his briefcase. Either way, Paolo Gucci started recording the meeting himself, demanding company records and alleging that company profits were being siphoned to offshore holding companies. And by this point, chaos had erupted. It was said that Aldo Gucci threw an ashtray across the room at Paolo because he knew Paolo was hoping to get information he could use to blackmail them with. And Paolo then claims that a tussle ensued with Giorgio, his brother, over the tape recorder, and then someone seized him from behind. He believed it to be Maurizio, and then he felt a sting on his face and saw blood on his jacket, because somehow during the middle of this scuffle, Paolo had been scratched, most likely by Giorgio while fighting over the tape recorder, but either way, Paolo Gucci managed to make his way out of the room, leaving his tape recorder behind. But his fight was far from over. After escaping the boardroom, Paolo Gucci filed a $13.3 million lawsuit claiming breach of contract, and another $2 million lawsuit for infliction of severe emotional distress, assault, and battery, claiming his relatives beat him with fists and various objects. And this is where I want y'all to understand the chokehold that Gucci had over Hollywood and European royalty, because after news broke about this now infamous boardroom meeting, Jackie Kennedy cabled one singular word to Aldo Gucci. Why? Asking the question no one could wrap their heads around. Prince Rainier telephoned Gucci headquarters to express his sorrowful condolences. People magazine wrote a 3-page article titled "Move Over Dallas, Behind the Glittering Facade, A Family Feud Rocks the House of Gucci." And I know this sounds absolutely ridiculous, but Gucci meant a lot to the elite, to Hollywood royalty, to royalty itself. Gucci represented luxury and status. They had attracted elegant clientele who didn't fight, at least publicly. And this news broke the glass ceiling and threatened to destroy their entire reputation. The family was always going head to head, but this was the first time there was ever a crack in their facade, and the family was pissed. And Paolo's then wife Jenny Gucci even came out to say the situation was really appalling. What shocked me most was how self destructive the Guccis could be. I had to suffer all their terrible spite, all the greed and conceit they showed to one another. It's all spite, one out to get the other. They double cross and behave like spoiled children. I'm going to get Aldo. I'm going to get Giorgio. Just like children at their worst. All they were doing is destroying everything they've got, their entire empire, and they can't see it. They see themselves as on par with the Republic of Italy or the Queen of England. Newspapers read Gucci is a multi-million-dollar company where more chaos reigns than in a Roman pizzeria. And G isn't for Gucci, but for Guerra. Grimaldo Gucci even came out saying that the bloodstained Paolo was responsible for their struggles and conflicts. Which is crazy because, like, girl, they kicked you out of the company. Why would you ever agree with them? And it's not like she's wrong. Paolo Gucci was out for blood. Well, money. But that's the same thing in the House of Gucci. He compiled a dossier filled with all the financial documents he could get his hands on, which included evidence of millions of taxable dollars being siphoned to offshore accounts. And he didn't use this information to threaten his family outright. Oh no. Instead, he filed the documents in federal court, thinking he could force his father's hand, to either allow him to use his own name and or invite him back into Gucci to launch his Gucci Plus line.
So hit and love together. Hit because, I was getting by the neck. You stupid. Why did you end it like that?
But neither of the two would happen. Instead, Aldo would be indicted on tax evasion charges by the US government. And Paolo Gucci would later come out to say the papers were only intended to force his hand. He was stupid not to realize what would happen.
And as much as it's upsetting, it's also a bit comical to me for Paolo Gucci to even imply that his father Aldo was stupid. Because, like, no, babe, you're fucking stupid. Dumber than a bag of rocks. Which is actually an insult to the rocks. And I don't know how he had any. But Paolo's close friend said that he did what he did to his father and his family because he had every reason to after they cut him off. They all believed that the family owed him, which is downright ridiculous because nobody owed this boy anything. And after years of trying to see their side, I still don't understand what anyone was talking about. I don't know how anyone owed him. Owed him for what? The dude got a job because of his family. He lived a very lavish life, traveled the world, and got anything and everything he ever wanted. And when his dad and his uncle told him no, he stomped his feet and said that's unfair, and in turn set out to destroy everything. Someone help me make it make sense, because it doesn't make sense to me.
And if you feel even slightly bad for this dude, don't. He was absolute scum of the earth. In one instance, to avoid paying one of his ex wife's child support, he pretended to be broke. He was momentarily jailed for his actions, and when police raided his place and looked through all of his assets, they found more than 100 emaciated and unkept prized Arabian horses that Paolo Gucci had hidden at a stable house in Yorktown Heights. Some were said to be so bad off that they had to be put down. In my mind, this dude deserved everything he got in life. But in my opinion, he deserved more. Maurizio Gucci said Paolo started going his own way with no knowledge of other things, no board of directors. He thought he could do as he pleased because, in his opinion, he was a genius. There were always problems with Paolo, dating back to the early 60s. Not that I had anything against him personally, but he was a strange guy. Maybe he was overshadowed by the figure of his father. I don't know. But I remember when I went into the factory as a very young man, he would always be moving around, going from one job to another. First, he was a designer. Then he was not a designer. Then he left the factory and went to America. Then from America back to Italy, always trying to conquer something he could not conquer. His brother Roberto even said, I have an affection for him. He had a place inside the company like I had, but he wanted to go his own way. Nothing in the company pleased him. Everything was no good in his eyes. We were living in the past, ancient people with out of date mentalities. Domenico Desolé even came out and said Paolo wasn't fooled by his contracts. He signed them happily. His problem was that he could never stop making deals behind the family's back. And funny enough, out of all the lawsuits Paolo Gucci ever filed against Gucci and his own family, and there were many, so many that I didn't include because they were petty, this one was the only one that ever made it to court. Aldo Gucci's arrest and court date will spill over into the next few years. And we will talk about Aldo's arrest and his court date because they'll spill out sporadically over the years, but we're going to move on a bit.
And as if Aldo Gucci didn't have enough to worry about, his health was now failing him too. At some point, he had contracted viral pneumonia and almost died. Like, died. And it was said that in a brief moment of clarity, he found peace. He decided that life was simply too short, and he wanted to marry his longtime partner, Bruna. Now, there are two versions of how this supposedly went down. Neither are great. One version of the story is that Aldo went to Olwen, his wife, asking for a divorce, and she contested this motion, claiming that they weren't separated, but in fact still together. The other version of the story, which is the one that I tend to believe, I think it was his daughter Patricia who talked about it in her book. I feel like she would know more than we do, obviously. But this version would also explain later on the anger and betrayal that Aldo felt towards his sons. This version of the story is that Aldo discovered that his marriage to Olwen in 1928 was never officially registered by law, so technically they were never legally married. And Aldo decided to keep this information to himself and plan a secret wedding because he didn't want Olwen or his sons to find out of fear that they would try and contest it. But in true Gucci fashion, information about this secret wedding got around. I actually believe it was a Gucci employee who informed one of the brothers about this secret wedding, and in turn, all three sons rushed their mother to the registrar office in Rome to officially record their marriage and make it official. I mean, they were separated. They hadn't been together since World War II. But Owen, just like the rest of this family, wanted more. She wanted, I don't know what she wanted. Maybe she wanted money or the name and the fame that came with being a part of this family. I don't know. But despite living separate lives and Aldo spending much of his entire life taking care of her, that wasn't enough. And as for the sons, I have absolutely no idea what they were thinking. They already had shares in the company and jobs. As well, they had been included in Aldo's will. That is until Aldo had found out about what they had done. And after learning that they helped their mother contest his marriage, this proved to be his final straw, an act that was entirely unforgivable, even in his death.
And while Aldo's sons were going around disappointing him left and right, Maurizio Gucci was excelling. He took advantage of the fact that Aldo's sons were acting up and spent his time showing Aldo what he was capable of. And because of that, Aldo started giving Maurizio more freedom to thrive. And he did. His time in New York was very successful. But in 1982, around the time of the infamous boardroom meeting, Maurizio decided to move back to Milan. Well, that's at least what he told the family. The reality is that he moved back to Milan to take care of his father Rodolfo, whose health was failing him. Rodolfo didn't want anyone to know, especially Aldo, that he was sick. So Maurizio moved back, and it was in Milan where Maurizio Gucci really hit his stride. Going back to Milan, he noticed a wave of change reshaping the Italian fashion industry. Designers like Missoni, Giorgio Armani, Gianfranco Ferré, and Gianni Versace had emerged and established Milan as the center of women's ready-to-wear. And Maurizio Gucci knew that to remain competitive and part of the new landscape, Gucci needed to make a change, one that would bring back the glamour of what Gucci used to be. And so he focused his time on reviewing Gucci's thousands of products and styles and paring them down. Because at that moment at Gucci, there was no coordination and no oversight. Everyone from Aldo, Rodolfo, Vasco, Giorgio, Paolo, Roberto, Maurizio, and more were designing and producing what they wanted.
We are like an Italian trattoria. The whole family is in the kitchen. And so we are.
And the result was an extremely diverse mix of products, with the only commonality being the Gucci name. It was a far cry from the stylistic harmony Aldo Gucci had pioneered early on. Maurizio's new intent was to bring that harmony back, so he worked on cataloging all the products and reducing Gucci's 22,000 product catalog to just 7,000 products. By 1983, Milan began identifying Maurizio Gucci as the youngest leader of the Gucci dynasty, and Patrizia Reggiani called this the era of Maurizio Gucci, and it was all thanks to her. Or so she thought, at least. She claimed that she did everything in her power to make him a leading figure in the Milan social scene, going around Milan calling herself the representative of Maurizio Gucci, cruising around in the latest Valentino and Chanel, boasting about how Maurizio Gucci was going to take Gucci to new heights. And her reward in all of this was that Maurizio let her design her own line of gold jewelry for Gucci, called Oro Crocodillo, chunky standalone pieces that were imprinted with a crocodile pattern. And Patrizia Reggiani hoped that this collection would be for Gucci what the Love Lock was for Cartier, a signature product that could be identified as Gucci. In the end, it was flashy costume jewelry that was wildly expensive, with some of the pieces going for around $15,000, which is around $39,000 today. It was just another idiotic idea that didn't represent the ethos of Gucci, done at the hands of Maurizio, who would contradict himself a lot throughout the years as he struggled to maintain control of a company he was ill fit to manage. Because while Maurizio Gucci was paring down Gucci's product catalog and talking about bringing back stylistic harmony, he was letting his then wife create flashy jewelry for the company that didn't speak to the ethos of Gucci. This is a man who would contradict himself a lot throughout the years as he struggled to maintain control of a company that he was ill fit to manage. But he did try to step up. His father was secretly dying, and his uncle Aldo's health was also failing him, and Maurizio felt that it was his duty to take up the role his father had laid out for him as a child. He knew it was coming, it was inevitable. And after a few months in Milan in May 1983, Maurizio Gucci informed the entire family that Rodolfo had prostate cancer, and he didn't have much time left. And it was at that moment that the entire Gucci family understood why Maurizio Gucci had been so insistent on moving back to Milan. And they were a little suspicious. Some reports even said that if you were to have visited Rodolfo during those last few weeks in May 1983, you would have seen Maurizio's odd behavior, which the family said resembled that of someone guarding a prisoner. On Aldo's visit, he noted how odd it was that Maurizio had stayed by Rodolfo's bedside the entire time, and how Rodolfo had to insist that Maurizio leave the room to give the two brothers some privacy. Aldo claims after Maurizio left the room, Rodolfo made him promise to keep an eye on Maurizio and to never let Patrizia Reggiani near Gucci. Then, only a few days later, on May 14th, 1983, Rodolfo Gucci passed away. Before the reading of his will, the entire family knew that Rodolfo had left everything, his money and his Gucci shares, to his only son Maurizio. But the legality of how Maurizio would obtain Rodolfo's Gucci shares will come into question in court a few years from now when everyone is scrambling for control of Gucci, which we will talk more on soon.
He replied, I want my son to protect the 50% he's going to inherit, and that's masses. I don't want him to take over.
But just like with Bosco's death, Rodolfo's passing left this air of uncertainty. When Rodolfo was alive, there was this unspoken trust between the brothers. Aldo controlled Gucci America, while Rodolfo controlled Guccio Gucci. And now Aldo didn't know what was going to happen. So after Rodolfo's passing, Aldo watched Maurizio closely, unsure of how their new arrangement would play out, as Maurizio was now the largest shareholder in the company with 50%. Aldo had 16.7, Roberto and Giorgio each had 15, and Paolo had 3.3%. These were very uncertain times for Aldo the OG Gucci, who was now powerless against his nephew. And while everyone was sort of tiptoeing around, unsure of what was going to happen, Maurizio was reeling from his father's death in a really strange way. While he was sad, his father's death became this sort of freedom for him. Because Rodolfo used to scold Maurizio for spending money with seemingly no limit, and had actually warned his wife Patrizia during his final days that once Maurizio got money and power, he would change. No longer would he be the man that she married.
Quando Maurizio ha ereditato le sue azioni, non ragionava più. We have this transformation. Mr. Jekyll became Dr. Hyde. And this is incredible because I'm still convinced that he's a good person, but he's acting in a different way.
And yes, Maurizio does change, but in a way I do feel bad for him. Everyone was always trying to push him, mold him, and control him, telling him what to do and never asking him what he wanted. Unlike Aldo's sons, his career path had been laid out for him as a child. He never had any other choice. While Aldo's sons could create boutiques and franchises and bop around to Gucci America and Guccio Gucci and create lines, Maurizio's father raised him to run Gucci and scolded him whenever he veered off path. And the job was hard. The luxury goods business is cutthroat and highly competitive. And as we reached the 90s, the Gucci family would need to be far more competitive if they were going to keep up. And after Rodolfo's death, everyone questioned whether Maurizio Gucci had what it took to make those tough decisions and be up for the battles that lay ahead.
At that point of time, he became the single largest shareholder, 50% of the company, and he feels that he has the skills, the will, and the knowledge to actually run the company at a different level. The first thing he told me was he felt that he was predestined to run the company and turn the company, which was already a very successful company, into a global business.
And the first battle had actually already begun. Paolo Gucci's original boardroom lawsuit against his family and his father had been thrown out by the courts, but the information regarding money being siphoned to offshore accounts had caught the attention of the IRS, who felt cheated. They wanted their money, and the IRS does not play. They will get you for every penny. And by summer 1983, just a few weeks after Rodolfo's passing, the IRS was knocking on the offices of Aldo Gucci's Fifth Avenue office with a subpoena for his personal financial records, as well as those for Gucci America. No one was prepared. No one knew what was coming. The entire Gucci family had underestimated three things. One, they failed to see just how far Maurizio Gucci was willing to go to gain power. Two, no one quite understood Paolo Gucci's determination to create a Gucci Plus line and his willingness to backstab his entire family for power. And three, the IRS, who were investigating Gucci for tax evasion, and the Gucci family's nonchalant attitude towards the entire case. And when I tell you from here on, it's just chaos. I'm not joking. And I know I said it in part one, I'll probably say it throughout, but it's because you're going to want a break. And there is none. Because while Aldo Gucci was being audited by the IRS, Paolo, the son who had caused all of this, was calling Aldo up for money. He was broke and couldn't support his family, and on the call he begged his father not only for money, but to let him run his Gucci Plus line. But Aldo refused him outright, insulted and aggravated by the idiotic Paolo. I mean, the man was battling the IRS because of him, and dealing with his failing health on top of that. And the son that had caused all of this turmoil in the first place was calling him up for help and money. The audacity of Paolo Gucci is truly remarkable and simply unmatched. By May 1984, the Justice Department had conducted a grand jury investigation into the case of Aldo Gucci, and the investigation found evidence that Aldo had personally cashed checks made out to Gucci. Domenico Desolé tried to explain the severity of the case to everyone, but none of them seemed to care. He told Aldo outright, "I don't have anything against you. Please understand." He knew that Aldo would face jail time, but Aldo simply denied the reality of it.
I never forget. I remember with a board meeting of Gucci America, and Maurizio asked me and said, "You have to explain what this means." And yes, I tried to explain to the members of the family, this is the United States, it's very serious. And tax fraud is very serious, it's not Italy. One member of the board said to me, "You're pessimistic." I said, "Well, maybe, what do you want me to say?"
No one understood the severity of this case. They all saw Gucci as their own. No one had any concept of personal versus corporate. Aldo even said, "I've built this company, and I deserve to get something back for all my work." Domenico Desolé felt the situation was hopeless, so he reached out to the other majority shareholder, Maurizio Gucci, with a Hail Mary plan to save Gucci. Domenico Desolé pleaded with Maurizio, saying, "You don't understand. If Aldo goes to jail, he is not going to be there anymore to own the company. Something must be done." And after a while, a reluctant Maurizio finally agreed. Domenico Desolé knew that Maurizio had a vision, a singular unified Gucci with a theme. But every idea he had been blocked by his cousins, his father, and his uncle, each of whom defended their right to do what they thought was best for Gucci. Aldo wanted to run Gucci America how he saw fit, which he should have. I do agree about that. However, Aldo's sons, Roberto and Giorgio, each had their own Gucci franchises and boutiques that they were running independently from Gucci, which were adding to the dilution and chaos of the Gucci image. Maurizio's vision for Gucci was to shave the company down, reduce the amount of stores, product lines, franchises, and boutiques. No more ideas running rampant. And Aldo's sons weren't having it. Just like every other man in this story, Aldo's sons had little patience for Maurizio Gucci and his newfound power. They were angry that he had a 50% stake in the company, which they believe he hadn't earned. It's absolutely pure jealousy, because if you ask me, not one of those boys earned anything. But that's besides the point. Domenico Desolé approaching Maurizio was a turning point. Up until now, Maurizio was just gliding through the company aimlessly. He wasn't trying to do anything crazy, even though he had a 50% stake in the company. But now he saw a way forward. Domenico Desolé had a plan to save Gucci, and Maurizio agreed. The plan was for him to create an alliance with another shareholder, and at the next family shareholder meeting, they would dissolve the existing board and nominate Maurizio Gucci as chairman of Gucci US operations. There was one problem, though. Who on the family board would agree to this plan? Aldo was out of the question. Roberto and Giorgio would never agree to go against their father. But Paolo? Paolo was a different story. Maurizio knew Paolo was broke, angry, and held no clear loyalties to his father, brothers, or even Gucci. He was the only obvious choice, and it didn't take much convincing. In June 1984, the day of the planned coup, neither Maurizio, Aldo, or Paolo were in attendance at the boardroom meeting. Aldo was busy, and Maurizio and Paolo were too scared to be there in the case that Aldo was present. They absolutely wouldn't have been able to go through with it on their own. Domenico Desolé filed the motion, and Paolo Gucci's board representative agreed to a 51-49 controlling stake in Gucci. Paolo would be given 49% and the ability to create his own designs. He wouldn't need to create a Gucci Plus line now. And in September 1984, at the next family boardroom meeting, Domenico Desolé filed a motion to dissolve the Gucci board, thus removing Aldo Gucci from power and creating a committee with Maurizio Gucci as chairman. Paolo used his 3.3% voting power and agreed to everything. By October 1984, Maurizio was given 4 out of the 7 board seats. Aldo Gucci was given the honorary title of president with no power to enact change, and Maurizio, with Paolo's help, had neutralized his entire family.
A crucial meeting took place at the Gucci offices in New York's Fifth Avenue. Armed with Paolo's votes, Maurizio effectively threw Aldo out as president.
I would not use the way thrown out, because he also agreed on that time that he had to go out.
He agreed?
In any case, yes, he knew it.
But Patrizia, the not-so-loving wife, says her husband conveniently rewrites history.
He said that Aldo, in fact, wanted to retire.
I doubt very much.
Do you think he really believed that?
No, cannot, because he knows that Aldo will die in the middle of his shop.
By January 1985, Domenico Desolé was appointed president of Gucci America, with his primary focus being on cleaning up the company's financial affairs, responding to the tax evasion allegations, and hiring a professional management team.
Again, it's a big change in my life because I went from being the lawyer for the company and the family. He asked me to run Gucci America, and with a specific goal of settling with the IRS.
And in all fairness, Domenico Desolé was the only person who was interested in saving Gucci. The only one. And I mean the only one. Because while Maurizio was following along in this plan, he was only really interested in excelling at the job his father had set out for him as a child. Maybe it was him trying to prove he could do it, that he was enough, but I don't know. I don't know the guy. What I do know is that just as his career was now taking off, his marriage to Patrizia Reggiani was falling apart. The job had become all-consuming. He was clocking anywhere from 12 to 15-hour days and traveling constantly. And the more Maurizio relied on his advisors for business advice, the more annoyed he became with Patrizia and her efforts to guide him. Years earlier, he had looked to Patrizia for support and strength, someone to help him stand up to his father. But after Rodolfo's death, Patrizia became the surrogate Rodolfo. She didn't understand the newfound pressure he was under, or why he worked so much. She didn't sympathize with him, congratulate him, or celebrate him. Instead, she criticized his decisions, constantly trying to tell him what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. He would come home after working 12 to 15 hours, just to hear her scrutinize every one of his decisions. So Maurizio naturally started pulling away, and the more he pulled away, the more paranoid Patrizia got. She felt herself losing control and power. She became intolerable. If Maurizio wasn't hearing about his wrong decisions, he was hearing all about how she had felt personally victimized. Domenico Desolé even said Patrizia really beat him up. She set him up against his uncle, his cousins, or anybody else she didn't feel was treating him properly.
Patrizia was very ambitious. She wanted to have a role within the company, wanting to become not only Mrs. Gucci, but also Gucci CEO. And Maurizio was not in accord.
She's coming into the office and creating scenes in front of the staff. Their relationship really started to break apart.
At Gucci events, she would say things like, "I didn't get offered champagne first, which means they don't respect you." Another person said she became a nuisance. She was an ambitious woman and she wanted a role in the company. I told her to stay out and she hated me for it.
They break up probably because Maurizio started to be adult in this sense. Started to understand that Patrizia wanted control of his life.
And by May 1985, Maurizio had had enough of her behavior and her demanding attitude, so he packed a small suitcase, telling Patrizia that he was going on a business trip, and he left. And after a few days, Maurizio had someone go round to the house and inform Patrizia that he wouldn't be returning home. Not now, not ever.
Quando è ricomparso, da quello che mi ricordo e da quello che mi ha detto lei, non voleva più tornare insieme. Ecco, il matrimonio rotto.
And now, obviously, this isn't how you deal with your problems, especially when there are children involved. But Maurizio had no idea how to handle confrontation. He could never stand up to his father, and Patrizio was no different. Packing that suitcase and walking out was probably the hardest thing he ever did. The courage it had to take for him to leave. All I'm saying is that this wasn't a decision he came to lightly. It took months before he could even talk to her again. And when she questioned him on why he left and why he was avoiding her, he tried to explain that he needed his freedom. He wasn't interested in sleeping around or seeing other people. He just needed his freedom. And Patrizia didn't understand that. Despite knowing Maurizio for more than decades by this point, even I know that this man needed freedom. A freedom that he never had because he went from living under his father's control to living under Patrizia's. He told her, "First I had my father, now I have you. I have never been free in all my life. I didn't enjoy my youth, and now I want to be free." There was never a moment in his life where Maurizio Gucci could just be Maurizio. There was no opportunity for him to figure out who he was, and his father's death gave him that chance.
The relationship with Patrizia was a dependent relationship. All of a sudden, that dependency had been eliminated, and therefore he was free to focus exclusively on what he wanted to do, which was turn around the company.
And now, obviously, she didn't take the separation well. By this point, she had turned to her friend Pina Ariema and became obsessed with writing in her journal, documenting everything she could. She wrote down every phone call Maurizio made to the house and to their daughters, how long they lasted and what they talked about. I mean, truly insane behavior. She would never move on from trying to hurt him. But Maurizio didn't have time for this. There was far too much happening at Gucci. By November 1985, his original agreement with Paolo Gucci had fallen through. Not surprising. Paolo Gucci filed a lawsuit claiming Maurizio had seized control in violation of their agreement by freezing him out of the company. So he tried to get Maurizio's nomination as chairman declared null and void. But Maurizio, anticipating this, had a backup agreement lined up with Giorgio as a failsafe. But the hits did not stop coming. At the same time, Aldo heard from one of Rodolfo's old assistants that just 2 days before Rodolfo's death, Maurizio had ordered her to forge Rodolfo's signature on all of his Gucci shares. Now, Aldo had already suspected that Maurizio had forged Rodolfo's signature because Rodolfo had made it very clear to everyone that Maurizio wouldn't inherit a penny until after his death, and not a moment before. So at the first boardroom meeting after Rodolfo's death, everyone was surprised when Maurizio showed up with Rodolfo's shares having already been signed over to him. And the reason that I keep bringing up these forged documents is because if Rodolfo had signed his shares over to Maurizio before his death, it would have saved Maurizio from having to pay over $8 million in inheritance taxes. But if they were signed after his death, forging his signature meant that Maurizio had not only committed tax evasion, but ownership fraud as well, which actually gave Aldo some leverage, and he took this information to court and claimed that Maurizio Gucci had took control of Gucci through illicit means. The dude could not catch a singular break. I understand why Aldo did this. But Maurizio was really going through it at this point as well. Not only with Gucci, but with his wife. Throughout all of this, in December 1985, Maurizio went to visit Patrizia and his daughters for the holidays. And while the family was opening gifts, an argument ensued because Patrizia was insulted by the gifts Maurizio had given her. Later that evening, she learned that Maurizio intended to leave the following morning, and that is when she confronted him. It was said that a physical fight broke out between them. I'm not exactly sure Patrizia's part in all of it, but it was said that Maurizio grabbed her by the neck and lifted her off the ground. Patrizia wrote in her journal that the 27th of December marked the end of their marriage. They began fighting over everything, and Maurizio began accusing her of keeping their daughters from him, and she had. She had used their daughters to punish him, thinking that the longer she kept them apart, the sooner he would come home. But Maurizio pushed back. He was finally standing on his own 2 feet. He changed the locks on the houses and banned her from every estate. And the only time Maurizio ever caught a break was in January 1986, when Aldo Gucci pleaded guilty to tax evasion. And in September 1986, he was sentenced to 1 year in jail, and upon leaving, his son Paolo sent the press in full force to capture the moment. Aldo told the press, "I'm still very sorry, deeply sorry for what has happened, for what I have done, and I apply for your indulgence. It won't happen again, I assure you." He claimed to have forgiven Paolo and anybody who had wanted me here today. Some members of my family have done their duty, and others have the satisfaction of revenge. God will be their judge. Paolo Gucci claimed to feel no remorse at his father's sentencing. And obviously he very clearly didn't, because he sent the press in full force to be present to embarrass his father. and oddly enough, it was actually Maurizio who felt the worst. It was said that he was saddened by the news, because he knew that Aldo didn't deserve this, and he even said if they had killed him, he would have suffered less. At the boardroom meeting after the trial, Aldo Gucci asked for peace, for them to work together in the future and to put the past turmoil behind them, telling everyone, I admitted my responsibility with regards to the US tax issue, to save the company and the family. But don't think that in those years, my little brother Rodolfo had his hands in his pockets. I got myself in a mess to help everybody. I have a big heart. And this is where things get a little odd, because while Maurizio cared the most about Aldo's sentencing and everything he was going through, Paolo didn't. And yet, he used his father's misfortunes as fuel for his own fire. Seeing the place that his father was in only made him want to get further revenge on Maurizio, who he felt had cheated him. After that boardroom meeting, there was this unspoken peace, where it felt like everyone was going to put away the drama, stop the fighting, and start working together. And not shockingly, Paolo wasn't hearing it. In the silence, he decided that he was going to secretly launch his Paolo Gucci Gucci Plus line. And Maurizio knew about it. He knew what Paolo was doing, and he had had enough. But this time, he waited until the day of Paolo's launch to arrive with the police to sequester all the items. So as guests were pouring in, the police were also coming through and taking everything with them. Paolo Gucci was humiliated and dead broke, having invested all of his money into that collection. But this didn't stop Paolo, because again, nothing ever seems to stop Paolo. And here's the thing about Paolo Gucci. He is never one to be underestimated. That boy went and gathered as many documents as he could, describing all of the offshore accounts Maurizio had, copies of his bank accounts, and a detailed description of how Maurizio had bought his yacht, which he bought using funds diverted through an offshore account his father Rodolfo had set up. Paolo then sent copies of this information to everyone he thought could use it. And this is what gets me at my core. Because if you're doing illegal things, you're committing tax fraud and tax evasion and using offshore accounts, and you get in a fight with your cousin, who you know already sold out his father for doing the exact same things, what made you think he wasn't going to do that to you? Why was Paolo able to get his hands on so many documents describing all of your illegal and illicit activities? Like, why didn't you get rid of it? I'm not even saying like commit tax fraud or they should have gotten away with it. But why didn't you get rid of it if you knew he had already done that to somebody else and you were doing illegal things? What was going to stop him from selling you out as well? This family is dumb. Like, they're dumb. Like, what are you talking about? Obviously, when Aldo Gucci heard the news, he moved to dissolve Gucci America, claiming gross management. But the courts didn't dissolve Gucci America because Maurizio already had pending investigations against him for tax evasion and fraud, allegations brought on by Aldo over Rodolfo's Gucci shares. So the courts ended up seizing control of Gucci, which included Maurizio's 50% stake. The company was now being controlled by the courts, and they had appointed someone of their own choosing to be chairman of the company while the case went to court. That meant that everyone was ousted and the company was locked up.
Did you participate in the forged signing of a document which would have saved immense an amount of taxes and inheritance?
Absolutely not.
And Maurizio knew from his lawyers that prosecutors were building a case against him and preparing a warrant for his arrest. So he spent the next few months on the run. And I'm not joking. He switched up his daily routine. He spent more and more time in the Milan countryside, eating lonely meals with his driver before checking into small local hotels or sleeping in his car. His trusted driver and friend helped devise a plan in case the police ever came for him, and eventually that plan would take action. In June 1987, the Italian IRS showed up at Gucci headquarters in Milan to arrest Maurizio. His driver saw the police arrive and sent a warning to Maurizio, who managed to escape out the back. His driver then picked him up and drove him to an off-road location where Maurizio's red Kawasaki was waiting for him. His driver then went back to Gucci headquarters to pretend and help the police find Maurizio, while Maurizio was actually making his way across the Swiss border, where he would remain for the next year in exile. The Italian government then charged him with illegal exportation of capital, so if he stepped back into Italy, he would have been arrested and tried. And Maurizio figured that this was going to happen, so right before his exile, he came up with a plan to relaunch Gucci and save himself. His new game plan was to buy out his entire family. All of them. And I can't even tell you that this is where the chaos ends, because it's not. It's really not. The chaos never stops. Before he fled, Maurizio met with Andrea Morante, an employee of Morgan Stanley, an investment bank, to help him devise a plan to help him buy out his family. Maurizio explained to Morante that this would be his last attempt to gain some control. He was either going to buy out his entire family or sell his shares to a third party who had the company's best interests at heart. So Andrea Morante pitched the Gucci plan at an investment meeting.
I can remember very vividly, as if it were yesterday, that when I explained to the other partners in the room, the Morgan Stanley room, that I had met with Maurizio Gucci and that he wanted to do some form of a shareholding restructuring, I'll never forget that for the first time when I was describing a transaction, everybody was interested. And that's, if you will, the first time that I understood the power of a brand.
And no one was interested. But someone at the meeting knew of a small investment bank that could possibly be interested. That was InvestCorp. InvestCorp was founded in 1982 by Namir Kadar, whose goal it was to buy up promising but struggling companies, improve them with his company's financial resources, and then resell them at a profit. And in 1984, InvestCorp actually bought Tiffany & Co., rehabbed it, and sold the shares on the New York Stock Exchange, making both InvestCorp and their wealthy clients richer. And after that, InvestCorp's investors now had a taste for investing in luxury brands. And InvestCorp had the financing and patience to deal with intricate and complicated situations. It really seemed like a good fit, and many at InvestCorp were interested in potentially working with Gucci. And this is where another problem arises, because Gucci was so glamorous and star-studded. Namir Kadar, who had founded InvestCorp, had immediately green-lighted the project, without gathering all the paperwork and financial records they usually asked for. And this was their mistake. Everyone let things slip a little because they were so excited to get their hands on Gucci. Namir Kadar not only loved Gucci's crocodile loafers, which were an integral part of his own wardrobe, but he saw working with Gucci as InvestCorp's entry into Europe's closed-off business community. And because of that, Namir Kadar made Gucci InvestCorp's top priority, naming their secret project the Saddle Agreement. Their primary goal was to relaunch the brand, install professional management, and establish a unified shareholder base, i.e. buying out the family.
Even though we didn't have a clue at that stage on how complex the transaction would be, we obviously knew that it was a family struggle and therefore not an easy one to deal with.
This deal was the beginning of another turbulent and wild business relationship. And from the start, InvestCorp's obvious target was Paolo Gucci. It's always Paolo, because he was the least loyal member of the family.
And in particular, he also explained to me how Paolo Gucci had been ill-treated by his father and given a significant reduced number of shares vis-a-vis his brothers, because Paolo had literally took his father to jail.
Paolo was a very tough negotiator. The most difficult thing to do with Paolo was to understand exactly what he had in his mind, because it would change every time. And what he did at the end of reading the contract, he took the contract and he threw it in the air, okay? And all the papers were sort of flying all over the place. And, we did not know how to interpret that, and so we thought we had lost a deal.
So what I did is I proposed to him to be paid a very similar amount of money as if he had not been penalized by his father. I'll pay you the same price that your brothers are going to be receiving. He accepted. So I actually went there with a suitcase of cash and purchased this initial 3% from Paolo Gucci, which actually changed the life of Gucci.
By October 1987, they bought out Paolo's 3.3% share in the company for $40 million.
Paolo thought he was selling to an investor. Little did he know that Maurizio was behind it.
He was quite happy to betray his family. He just asked how much.
One person who worked for the company said, Paolo has been a traitor to everyone.
Yes, maybe, yes. Against bandits. I mean, if you live them, you're a traitor, right? I think I remember, how do they call them, mafia?
Well, that's a strong word,
That's two words, yes.
But it's that concept, of course.
So essentially now Maurizio had 53.3% of Gucci, thereby locking the rest of the family out. But the family didn't know this. InvestCorp came in as a secret investor. They knew that if they had mentioned Maurizio's name and that he was the one interested in buying them out, the family would never agree. But even though they didn't know that it was Maurizio at the time, Paolo selling his shares for $40 million to a secret investor absolutely ruptured the sanctity of the family control. Paolo had stabbed his father in the back one final time. And since Maurizio now owned a majority of the company, the courts could now remove the freeze and allow Maurizio to run the company himself. A few months later, in March 1988, Roberto and Giorgio entered separate negotiations with InvestCorp, signing away their shares after InvestCorp reassured them that Maurizio Gucci wasn't involved in this, and that they were working on behalf of international buyers. They had no idea who they were selling to. And this is what really rocks me, because none of the boys had any idea who they were selling to. They just gave up everything to an international buyer. The boys were also told that their settlement offers would be worth way more than their shares were actually worth, which is really just a scare tactic because they could have held on to their shares. Maurizio still would have had full control over the company, but together with their father, they still would have owned 46.7% of the company. No one would have ever been able to get in, but they didn't do that. They chose money. And that's what makes this so sad, because Aldo Gucci had trusted his sons, and they chose money over everything.
Aldo's reaction was quite desperate, in fact. He was certainly upset almost in a physical way. He thought that not only there was the additional betrayal by his son Paolo, which in a way he was not surprised of, he was just sorry because he felt that somehow his participation in the company and his children's participation in the company were creating value, and he saw that value being destroyed by somebody else.
And while things were looking grim for Aldo Gucci, things were finally starting to look up for Maurizio. He had bought out most of his family, and he had even signed a deal with the Italian government allowing him to come back into the country and to face the charges against him without jail time. By November 1988, he was convicted of tax fraud, given a year's suspension, and ordered to pay back his inheritance taxes, which is some $53 million today.
You are not in hiding because you are innocent. You are in hiding because you must have done something.
Your husband is guilty.
Well, I'm sure, yes.
Of?
I mean, you know, he has been too excessive.
Then, after a long standoff in April 1989, Aldo Gucci was forced to sign over his 16.7% stake in Gucci, with InvestCorp employees saying he knew he had lost the match and had little to negotiate, but the sense that he could maintain his honor and in some way a role in the business was a matter of life or death. I had this overwhelming feeling that if he sold out entirely, he would die. It was as though he were tearing out a piece of himself, and in that moment, he hated his children for what they had done to him. After all he had given to them, he was left with nothing.
You could see that he was not happy about it. He would have spent his last day in the business if it was up to him, because that's the way he spent his life.
It was really like his stomach would be sold or his liver would be sold. He used that example, and that's why it was so difficult for him.
He told me, "You're not buying stock, you're buying my soul here."
And I could appreciate that. For he was very much in love with the company.
And it's incredibly sad. That man spent his entire life building that company, all for it to be thrown away for money. There was no loyalty from his children, no nothing. Aldo even tried to warn InvestCorp, telling them, "The only thing I want to ensure is that my biresquero of a nephew doesn't have anything to do with this. If he wins out, it is the end of everything I have created. I still care for Maurizio, despite all that had happened between us, but I am warning you, he is not equipped to wear the Gucci mantle. He will not be able to carry the company forward."
In life, I've been the engine of the family.
The engine.
And the whole family, they were the wagons. Now, the engine without the wagons is worthless. And the wagon without the engines, they don't move. But if you put them together, you create something.
Even Paolo's lawyers warned InvestCorp, telling them, we talk so much about representation and warranties, but I want you to think about this transaction as though you were buying a car off a used car lot. Buyer beware. And LOL. InvestCorp thought that what Paolo's lawyers had told them, and LOL, because when Paolo's lawyers told this to InvestCorp, they actually found it insulting because they had just gave his client $40 million for his 3.3% shares in the company. But they really should have listened. Alas, after 18 months, one of the longest, most complicated, and secretive series of acquisitions in investment banking history was over. Investcorp now owned 50% of Gucci, and Maurizio Gucci owned the other 50%. But per their agreement, Investcorp would remain a silent partner. They would allow Maurizio to run Gucci without exerting any power as an equal shareholder. They gave Maurizio all this leniency because they trusted him. They thought he was the sanest of all the Guccis. And that's fair, I guess. It has been said that Maurizio Gucci had this boyish charm to him that I think allowed people to really lower their guard when they were around him. But Investcorp's mistrust in Maurizio Gucci would have its consequences. But for now, everyone was chilling. Everyone but Aldo, that is. Aldo Gucci was, in fact, not chillin'. Soon after signing his life's work away, he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer, just like Rodolfo. His failing health was kept a secret from the entire family, except his wife Bruna and their daughter Patricia. And we'll kind of come back to this as we move through the story, but there was a lot that happened during this time. Because at the same time, in June 1989, Maurizio Gucci, now fully in charge of Gucci, got right to work, and his primary focus was wooing Dawn Mello. Dawn Mello was the former president of Bergdorf Goodman, and Maurizio wanted her as creative director of Gucci. She is credited with reviving Bergdorf Goodman from the brink of death by bringing in a wide range of luxury brands like Missoni, Fendi, Acris, Gianni Versace, Chanel, YSL, Oscar de la Renta, and just so many more. She brought youthfulness to Bergdorf's. She was a total boss, and Maurizio wanted her to reconquer the image of Gucci's youth, the glamour of La Dolce Vita, the 60s and 70s, the golden eras of Gucci. And at first she rebuffed the offer, but quickly became entranced, remembering the Gucci of her youth and how she once saved up an entire week's salary just to buy her first Gucci bag. And slowly but surely she saw the vision, and by October 1989, she found herself moving to Italy to be their new creative director. So what did Dawn Mello actually do for Gucci? Well, once she got to Gucci, she got right to work. She started making plans that Maurizio was slow to enact, which would become a major source of contention. But she knew first and foremost that Gucci was a Florentine icon, a brand they coveted and held immense pride over. So she went about cataloging items that had been lost. She is credited with creating an extensive archive. One day, she drove all around Florence looking for an old jewelry manufacturer that had worked at Gucci in the 60s, and when she found him, she explained that she wanted to see if he had any original pieces. And I kid you not, she said that this man brought out drawers full of old Gucci jewelry, and she spent hours going through every piece. She quickly rehired him to manufacture for Gucci again. She was an absolute genius. She scoured London flea markets looking for old Gucci pieces, and when she noticed that young English girls were looking for men's Gucci loafers, she questioned them, finding out they much preferred the men's loafer because they were far more comfortable and trendier than the women's loafer. So she remade the women's loafer to be sportier and provide more comfort. She even remade the infamous bamboo bags, model 0633, enlarging it to make it more practical, and even adding a detachable shoulder strap. She then shrank the bamboo bag and crafted them in satin, kidskin, and suede, in a rainbow of colors, including bubblegum pink, canary yellow, purple, red, navy, and black. She is also the only person who ever took the Prada phenomenon seriously. By the mid-80s, Prada had gained momentum and had attracted a following of Milan's fashion insiders. By 1984, they had invented the nylon bag, made from parachute materials, a revolutionary concept for the times, but it made the bag easy to clean, maintain, and pack. Most bags of this time period were very well structured and rigid. They didn't have any give to them, and that is partially why these nylon bags blew up. Dawn Mello saw this change and knew to balance Gucci's revival with the latest trends, she would need to create a soft bag that could easily be packed away for travel. So she revived the hobo bag, making it extremely slouchy, far less rigid than any Gucci bag. They could hold their shape, but also be folded away. In fact, when the soft bag concept was introduced at Gucci, most of their skilled workers had to be retrained as they were so accustomed to making highly structured and complex bags. Dawn Mello revolutionized Gucci, but the public still wasn't taking much notice. No one was attending the showrooms to see the latest bags and accessories. They were more focused on Giorgio Armani, Valentino, and Versace. But like the boss that she was, Dawn Mello called up every influential editor in New York and asked for their shoe size. She then mailed them each a pair of the newly revamped Gucci loafers. And once that happened, everyone was running back to Gucci. It really felt like glamour was being restored. But Maurizio would go and ruin that. He himself did try to restore Gucci's glamour. He just wasn't smart about how he did it. In an attempt to scale Gucci back, Maurizio sent out letters to more than 665 retail clients, notifying them that Gucci would be closing down the GAC, or Gucci Accessories Collection. If you remember from part 1, the GAC was a company Aldo created that sold like cosmetic bags, totes, wallets, other small items made of canvas with the GG monogram. These products were sold in department stores and in cosmetic collections. Very early on, the GAC actually started making higher profits than Gucci or Gucci, and became a very profitable section of the Gucci business, generating around $100 million a year, until it became a destabilizing force of the business. And that is primarily because of Maurizio Gucci. And he had the right idea. The GAC really cheapened the Gucci image. For most of the loyal rich clientele who bought Gucci as a high-end luxury brand, they didn't like that they were now seeing Gucci on the arms of everyone walking by them. But it's hard because the GAC really did bring in so much money. And in this in-between period, the GAC really became Gucci's main source of income. Domenico Desolé actually went to Investcorp to warn them of the potential consequences from Maurizio closing down the GAC, but they ignored him.
Things were done in a somewhat irrational way. I think that incurred massive costs in Italy, which the company could not afford at the time. For instance, he decided we had to clean an all new product. Okay, well, that's a great idea, but what's the cost of it? So overnight he said, no more GG. So I said, well, Maurizio, GG is like 70% of the sales, but he wanted to do it at all costs. So the company really went to, tailspin and started really losing money, and was very, very difficult. Became very painful.
And Maurizio pushed onward, doing everything he could to bury Gucci's drugstore image. He limited Gucci sales to only 64 retail stores. And Don Mello actually tried to help. She tried to show Maurizio that they needed to step into apparel, because she believed that this was an organic step in Gucci's future. Other designers were already killing the fashion scene, so Gucci really needed to get on it. And eventually, Maurizio relented, and they signed contracts to produce with Zama Sport. Don Mello really pushed and stressed the importance of getting a good ready-to-wear designer to help establish a concept, to build on Gucci's newfound identity. And that's when Tom Ford's name came up. Tom Ford at this time was a New York-based designer, but after his future and now late husband Richard Buckley went into remission, Tom Ford was looking for a change. He wanted to move and to work in Europe. And I feel like maybe I should give a little bio on Tom Ford to know how we got to this point with him. So I'll do that. Tom Ford was born into a middle-class family in Austin, Texas. He says that we are born the way we're going to be, and he was born in a blazer and loafers. Always quite different, in the second grade, he didn't carry a backpack, he carried an attaché case. Looking back, his childhood was generally happy. He spent most of his childhood in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and loved spending his summers with his grandmother Ruth, a woman known for her big hats, fake eyelashes, and big jewelry like concho belts and papier-mâché earrings. Tom Ford grew up watching her get dolled up for parties. Her style and flair had a huge impact on Tom Ford's design sensibilities. Growing up, Tom Ford found absolute love and security from his family, who supported him with everything and who helped him become who he was always meant to be. But outside of his home life, Tom Ford's life wasn't so great. But outside of his family and his home life, Tom Ford's life wasn't so great. He wasn't interested in nor good at football or team sports in general, and he couldn't shoot a BB gun. He was teased by the boys quite a bit, and it was absolute torture. He didn't feel safe, he was vulnerable, and it took him a very long time to come to terms with the pain of his past. Like anyone in that situation, he repressed his feelings until he couldn't ignore them any longer. Even today, he says he still finds himself in situations that cause him to panic, explaining that if a group of kids are playing soccer and he's standing on the sidelines and the ball comes towards him, he starts to panic because he knows he's going to have to kick the ball back to them, and he isn't good at soccer. It's an instant panic that makes him, as a grown man, feel silly, but it's always stayed with him. Despite this outwardly tough and unapproachable exterior, Tom Ford is actually quite shy, but a serious legend. When he was 17 years old, he moved to New York City to attend Parsons School of Design for Architecture, and within weeks he was hanging out with the likes of Andy Warhol and other socialites of New York City. He was introduced to Studio 54 by a guy in his art class who was trying to hit on him, and had invited him for a night out at Studio 54. And this is where everything truly began for him, because this is where he was given access to everyone you could think of. He created friendships and became influenced by the time period and everything Studio 54 and New York City in the 70s had to offer. That period of time is what he perceives as the most beautiful period in terms of style and design, because it was the first time something of such beauty had a real impact on him. After about a year at Parsons, Tom Ford dropped out to pursue modeling and to hang out at Studio 54. He would eventually find his way back to Parsons, graduating in 1986 with a degree in architecture. But he realized that, unlike his classmates, he didn't enjoy creating the buildings as much as he enjoyed dressing the models for the makeshift sets. And this is where things start to shift for him. Soon after going back to Parsons, Tom Ford met Richard Buckley at a fashion show, and within a month they were living together, and would go on to spend over 30 years together. On the night of their meeting, Tom Ford couldn't even look him in the eyes because of the wonderful yet scary feeling that came over him. And on the elevator ride down after the event, Richard Buckley talked the entire time, and Tom Ford, ever so intuitive and rational, just stood there taking him in. And by the time the doors of the elevator had opened, Tom Ford knew Richard Buckley was the one. It was just one of those things. He just knew, and that was it. Richard Buckley and Tom Ford stayed together through everything life threw at them. And after Tom Ford's graduation from Parsons, he started applying for jobs in fashion. He put on his resume that he had graduated from Parsons, casually leaving off the part where he got a degree in architecture. Parsons is famously a fashion school, so he just let people assume that his degree was in fashion. And it worked. He got hired by Kathy Hardwick, where he learned to cut patterns by going to the department stores and looking around for similar pieces and copying them. He then went to work under Marc Jacobs at Perry Ellis, where he worked for 2 years until he decided that it was time for him to leave America behind. And this is because Richard Buckley had just gone through remission, and it seemed like the perfect time for them to get a fresh start somewhere else. So Tom Ford set his sights on Europe, where he felt he could really make a name for himself. He felt that Europe, unlike America, really appreciated fashion and style. And he felt that because he was still relatively unknown, he could afford to take a risk. And it was through a mutual friend that Tom Ford was put in contact with Dawn Mello. And initially she turned him down because she had this rule against hiring friends or friends of friends. Eventually, though, he won her over, and she agreed to hire him on a trial basis. And by September 1990, Tom Ford had moved to Milan and started working at Gucci under Maurizio Gucci and Dawn Mello. His sky-rising stiletto heels, sleek suits, and handbags would soon resuscitate Gucci, bringing them fame and fortune. But that isn't now. Because as of right now, Tom Ford's work would go unappreciated by Maurizio and unnoticed by many in the public. However, his rise through Gucci would be mirrored by another designer who would later take over the helm at Gucci, Mr. Alessandro Michele. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's get back to the story. While Tom Ford was being hired by Dawn Mello to work at Gucci, Aldo Gucci was in the hospital dying from cancer. Oddly enough, the day before he died, his wife Bruna had already secretly called up his sons, told them what was happening, and had arranged for them to visit him that day. She didn't tell Aldo any of this until the boys had showed up, because he didn't want to see them. Even though he was dying. He was literally dying, and still he did not want to see them. And they knew that. Aldo's daughter Patricia said that they walked into his hospital room with their heads down in a single file line like sheepish children who had misbehaved. It was said that Aldo barely spoke a word to them as he had no intention of saying anything worthwhile. There was no forgiveness or absolution. They were there to witness at the end of his life, the only people who had his back, and that didn't include them. And I know it sounds harsh, I know it feels harsh, but we have to remember is that for Aldo Gucci, Gucci was his entire life. He was like 13 when the store opened and he started working there after school. And he single-handedly built Gucci, taking the Florentine shop and turning it into a global phenomenon with a hearty celebrity cachet. He did that. No one else. Everyone just leeched off of him, including his sons, including his brothers, including his nephew, and his wife or ex-wife or first wife, whatever you want to call her. Everyone took and took and took. So when his boys went behind his back, fucked up his marriage, and sold off their shares of the company that he had gifted them, he couldn't let it go. Because as I think I said earlier, they could have given him back their shares, and he would have had 46.7% of Gucci. He wouldn't have been a majority shareholder, no, but he would have locked that company up. InvestCorp would ultimately have had nothing, and yet those boys chose the money. There was no loyalty in the end, and I think that's what destroyed him the most.
I would start all over again. If you tell me, would you really? I would. Now I would have a much more experience about taking care of those who says I love you and then they trade you.
Anyway, the very next day, well, night, in the early hours of January 19th, 1990, Aldo Gucci suffered a brain hemorrhage and fell into a semi-coma where he passed away shortly after. In his quite literal last moments before his brain hemorrhaged, he was writing one final love letter to his wife, Bruna. It was said that on the page, mid-sentence, his pen just cuts down the page. It was the very last thing he ever did. 3 days later, on January 22nd, shocked mourners gathered for his funeral. Bruna and Patricia sat opposite Olwen and her 3 sons in church, and Maurizio stood off to the side. At the end of the service, it was said that he greeted some of his relatives, that included Roberto, Giorgio, and Paolo, who were said to have received him coolly, never forgiving him for how he took over Gucci and had humiliated their father. They blamed him for everything, because it was easier to make Maurizio the scapegoat for the loss and shame they felt, backstabbing their father. It was easier to make Maurizio the enemy in all of this.
Asked if Maurizio was fit to run Gucci.
Absolutely not. He can't. He can't because he dreams every 5 minutes. He doesn't think, he dreams. It's never grown up man, still what he was when he was 17, 18 years old. And his whole life, it's still run as a child.
And if you couldn't tell by now, I don't feel bad for any of them. These were spoiled, rich, entitled brats who wanted more, even after selling out their father and destroying the company he had built, and seeing him on his deathbed and him not having a kind word to say. It wasn't enough. They didn't get the picture. At the reading of Aldo's will, he symbolically disinherited Paolo and claimed his daughter Patricia, the sole and universal heir of Gucci. Again, it's symbolic because he didn't actually own Gucci anymore. And also in his will, he left his U.S. estate in Florida to Bruna, whom he had originally bought it for. They lived together there for like 20-some years. However, Olwen and her sons would try to contest this motion of the will and were rightfully denied. And this says everything to me, because even in his death, they wanted more. What the fuck would a European need with a house in Florida? The heat in Florida would kill them alone. What do you need a house there for? You didn't even live there. It's absolutely disgusting. These people are horrible. Money like that only makes you greedy for more. And while the world mourned Aldo Gucci's death, Maurizio Gucci had found some clarity in it, and he had a new vision. This vision was to bring Gucci under one roof. So he went to Namar Kadar at InvestCorp and explained that he wanted to buy back the outstanding 50% stake that InvestCorp owned, so he could restructure Gucci on his own, which was entirely unnecessary on Maurizio's part, because InvestCorp wasn't enforcing their voting rights or telling Maurizio how to run Gucci. He was basically running the company on his own already. But whatever. Namar Kadar agreed to Maurizio's request and even offered to help him find the financing he would require. Kadar put together an entire team to dig into Gucci's finances and calculate just how much Maurizio would need to finance to implement the changes he wanted, as well as buy out their shares of Gucci. And this is when InvestCorp realized just how much trouble Gucci was in. As I said before, they never looked into the details or the financials. They had no idea what state Gucci was in, and once they found out, oh boy, were they shocked. They discovered that Maurizio was repositioning Gucci way too quickly. He was cutting sales and increasing costs, which is the exact opposite of what you want in a business, naturally. InvestCorp now knew way too much, and they agreed to streamline Gucci into a single shareholding company under the condition that they establish a set of rules on how to govern the company and preserve the interests of the shareholders. InvestCorp was now going to begin using their 50% voting power to protect themselves and their investment in the case that one day their relationship with Maurizio soured. And it's ironic because it was actually these set of rules set out by InvestCorp that strained their relationship with Maurizio, because he saw their involvement in these rules as a direct attack against him. InvestCorp even put in a contingency that forbid Maurizio from putting up all or part of his 50% stake in Gucci as collateral for financing, meaning that he couldn't write or verbally offer up any of his 50% stake in exchange for money, while InvestCorp was free to do so if they wished. These rules were very strict because InvestCorp just now realized how much they could stand to lose because of the horrible condition Gucci was in financially. They even hired an auditing firm to look into why Gucci was losing so much money. because Gucci was bleeding money at this point. When Investcorp finished their review of Gucci, they found that sales had fallen 20% and profits were just disappearing. And I'm not talking thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm talking tens of millions of dollars just gone. They discovered that when Maurizio had shaved the business down and dismantled the GAC, it took products off the shelves completely. And Maurizio hadn't allowed Don Mello time to turn out products to replace the empty shelves. So there was this period of about 3 months where there were no products on the sales floor, and customers had assumed that the stores were closed. Maurizio didn't understand the business of it all. He led with the same intuition that Aldo did, but times were changing, and intuition wasn't going to cut it anymore. The 90s saw a boom in the luxury fashion industry, and the pressure to compete was weighing on Maurizio. He was losing control, grappling for power, ill fit to lead the charge, and willing to take Gucci down with him. Because it does get worse. This is also where it might get a little confusing. So, in February 1992, Citibank was asking Gucci America for repayment on a $25 million loan that they had taken out. Gucci America, which was now being run by Domenico Desolé, had taken out this $25 million loan from Citibank to keep the business afloat when Gucci Gucci, the parent company, did nothing to keep Gucci America alive. Basically, Gucci America couldn't pay for merchandise, meet payroll, or other operating expenses. And for the last few years, Domenico Desolé had been begging Investcorp to save Gucci America, pleading with them to look into what Maurizio was doing. But like I said before, they were chilling. They had put blind faith into Maurizio Gucci. They were caught up in his Italian charm. And after a small investigation, it was discovered that Gucci America was losing money because of the higher pricing policy that Maurizio Gucci had implemented on them. He was the cause for Gucci America's problems, and he simply wasn't interested in doing anything to help. He wanted to watch Gucci America die. After the investigation, Citibank agreed to hold off repayment of this $25 million loan until Gucci America could adjust to the higher costs. But their agreement was contingent on Domenico Desolé remaining CEO of Gucci America. This wasn't Domenico Desolé. This wasn't Investcorp's doing. This was Citibank's contingency. They would only allow this to happen if Domenico Desolé stayed in charge. And it was actually this contingency that deepened Maurizio's mistrust in Gucci America and Domenico Desolé, as he believed they were out to ruin him and take Gucci for themselves. He trusted no one. He felt an attack was coming from all angles. And then Investcorp discovered that not only was Gucci in debt, but so too was Maurizio. He owed some $40 million in personal loans that he also needed to pay back. And it's getting absolutely ridiculous by this point. I know. So a few weeks after the Citibank debacle, Investcorp discovered warehouses full of old Gucci stock that Maurizio had removed from the stores under his repositioning plan. The same plan that had emptied storefronts for 3 months. And this is where it gets infuriating, because all that product was sitting in a warehouse when it could have been making them money. Maurizio had filled these warehouses with bags, bolts of fabrics, and piles of leather, and washed his hands of them. He didn't care, but Investcorp did. They knew Gucci could use the money, so they pushed Maurizio to find a buyer for the almost $20 million in unsold inventory and fabrics. And after a lot of pushback from Investcorp, Maurizio finally and supposedly found a buyer by the name of Zorzi. This man will become slightly important in a little bit. And I say he supposedly found a buyer because we don't actually know if Maurizio ever found a buyer, because he shipped the inventory off to China, and once it arrived, no one ended up paying for the shipment, and then it disappeared. So someone from Investcorp had to travel to China, find the shipment, and sell it off themselves. And the only reason Gucci survived 1992 was because of an annual $30 million royalty check that Severin Wunderman sent from Gucci timepieces. The partnership investment Aldo Gucci had made all those decades ago. That man was still saving Gucci even in his death. The check from Severin Wunderman allowed Gucci to cover some basic expenses and salaries, but Gucci was so deep in debt, the check barely covered anything. Maurizio, feeling the pressure and aching with the need to get Investcorp off his back, secretly restarted the GAC in early 1993. The same line he had said cheapened the Gucci name. He reinstated it, hoping it would bring in enough money to pay back his personal debts, Gucci's debts, and buy out Investcorp. And it's my theory that He thought that by restarting the GAC collection, it would go back to bringing in the $100 million that it was bringing in before, under Aldo Gucci. But it didn't. It brought in some money, but it didn't bring in $100 million. In 1993, the GAC brought in around $30 million. Not nearly enough to keep Gucci running. It was absolute utter chaos from top to bottom. I could literally pull my hair out. I'm so stressed talking about this. And just to give you an idea of how chaotic it actually was at this time, the managing director of Gucci UK, a man by the name of Carlo Maggello, one day made the largest sale in the history of the company. A sale that ultimately helped save the company. So a customer walked into Maggello's store wanting to buy a full set of Gucci's precious crocodile bags and briefcases. The set included 5 to 6 bags and they were perfect for work and travel, but the London store didn't have a full set. So Carlo called up a few other stores and managed to pull together a full set. The customer ended up loving the set so much that he went back to Carlo a few weeks later to order an additional 27 matching sets, in every color as gifts. Obviously, this was a very huge sale, with the total value being around $2.4 million, which is around $4.5 million today. So Carlo put this order into the Gucci factory, who informed Carlo that they didn't have enough crocodile skins available to complete the order. So Carlo called the customer for a 10% deposit, which was a smart move by Carlo. However, the 10% deposit didn't go to buying more crocodile skins. Oh no, it went to paying employee salaries. So Carlo called the factory and made them search the warehouse top to bottom until they could turn up enough skins to produce some of the first few sets, in exchange for another partial payment by the customer. And with that partial payment, more skins were bought and the order was fulfilled. And what should have been a highly profitable sale ended up barely making a profit. Some of these profits even went toward helping Tom Ford finish one of his Gucci ready-to-wear collections. See, Maurizio was spiraling, losing touch with reality. He trusted no one and felt utterly alone. So he reacted with anger, which he took out on everyone, mostly Domenico Desolé and Don Mello, two people he now vehemently hated. He hated Domenico Desolé because he didn't like how he asked questions and questioned Maurizio's leadership. He disliked Don Mello because he claimed she always disregarded his orders, made designs without his approval, and was becoming too expensive. His anger towards them was obviously misplaced, but nonetheless he persisted. And it's probably not surprising, but the press finally caught wind of Gucci's misfortunes and started mocking them in the news. And Maurizio lost it. He believed the press had been tipped off. And in his mind, he believed it was Don Mello, even accusing her outright of leaking information. And even after she denied it, he still believed it. So to hurt her, he refused to pay her design team, who worked under Gucci America and were in charge of all things apparel and shoes. Maurizio even sent a fax to Domenico Desolé telling him to fire Tom Ford and all other designers being paid under Gucci America. By this point, Tom Ford had been working at Gucci for years and was very worried his time there would tarnish his career. It didn't matter that for the last few years he had designed all of Gucci's 11 product lines, including footwear, clothing, bags, accessories, luggage, and gifts. With Don Mello saying, Maurizio didn't seem to understand that Tom was designing everything by himself, and all of Ford's friends believed Gucci's image could ruin him, but he was determined to finish Gucci's fall 1993 collection, which he set out to be his last. Tom Ford actually went to Don Mello after everything Maurizio had done to her, and he told her outright, I'm not going. I can't leave you in this mess. We have a collection to put out. Let's get back to work. The biggest problem was that there was no money. No money for fabrics or salaries, and this is where Carlo Maggello, managing director of Gucci UK, comes into play, because Tom Ford knew about that sale. So him and Don Mello called Carlo Maggello up and asked him to divert some of the profits from that sale to Gucci America to cover expenses. And he did. And again, it's just utter chaos, because this is not how it works. This isn't how it works at all. So while Tom Ford was going rogue and Maurizio was yelling and firing everyone, Citibank was making moves. They were reaching out to Swiss authorities to sequester Maurizio's assets for non-payment on his personal loans, and it was then discovered that he had unpaid mortgage payments on his Swiss properties from another bank. And with that, Swiss authorities took both his house in St. Moritz and his 50% stake in Gucci as collateral. They informed him that if he didn't pay back his loans by May of 1993, his assets, including Gucci, would be auctioned off. And the rest of what I'm going to tell you shows just how detached Maurizio Gucci actually was. Investcorp actually heard this news about Maurizio's Gucci stake being held as collateral through the business community, not through Maurizio himself. But they saw this as their opportunity to gain some leverage and control. They went to Maurizio with an offer of $40 million to pay back his personal loans and an additional $10 million for 5% of his stake in Gucci. So the partnership would be 55-45. They even said that they would hire on a competent CEO to run the company and allow Maurizio to stay on as chairman, an honorary title, much like the one he and Domenico Desolé gave to Aldo Gucci. And Maurizio was so insulted by the offer, he refused to be a guest in his own house. Well, it would have been more accurate to say his family's house, but nevertheless, he refused to take their deal.
I told him that it was in his best interest, in order to keep and preserve the good relationship he had had with Investcorp, to go to Investcorp and say, let's choose a common new chief executive officer, somebody who's really going to operate the business. And so when I told him that, unfortunately, the reaction was extremely negative, because for him, I was telling him, which is the truth, that he was not capable to run the company. And I felt the responsibility of telling him that in his own interest, but sometimes, your own interest is perceived in a different way.
Maurizio walked out on Investcorp determined to find someone to bail him out. And in a desperate attempt to win, he turned to the same man that he had supposedly sold the old Gucci inventory off to in China, a man by the name of Zorzi. The two men made a deal. Zorzi would give Maurizio the $40 million he needed, and Zorzi would get exclusive distribution rights with Gucci in the Far East. As collateral on the agreement, Maurizio wrote Zorzi a letter putting up his 50% stake in Gucci. But remember, he couldn't legally do this because he was bound by the agreement with Investcorp, which made putting up his shares of the company as collateral a direct violation of their binding agreement, which meant that if Investcorp found out about this, they could take everything from him. So Maurizio decided not to tell Investcorp about his deal with Zorzi. Instead, he just informed them that he had found the money to pay back his loans, and everything was going to be good. Everything was going to be great. They could go back to normal. But obviously they were curious. They wanted to know where a man who was dead broke had somehow managed to find $40 million all of a sudden. So they pressed him for more information. And that is when Maurizio spun the wildest and stupidest story. He told Investcorp about how his late father Rodolfo had come to him in a dream and told him to check under the floorboards of their house for a surprise. So Maurizio awoke from this dream and ripped up the floorboards in his house to discover a cool $40 million hidden away. Obviously, when Investcorp heard this story, they were floored. I've been waiting all day to make that joke. It's funny. You should laugh at that. It's funny. They were floored. He ripped up the floorboards. Never mind. Whatever. Investcorp felt that this story was a slap in the face. Naturally. That Maurizio didn't respect them. Obviously. And they were fed up. All the goodwill between them, and there had been a lot, was spent up. And there was no turning back now. At that moment, Investcorp decided that they would be going to war with Maurizio Gucci over the House of Gucci. The battle was going to be ugly. They knew that they would have to risk everything, because Maurizio Gucci was going to do everything in his power, even if it meant pushing Gucci into its grave to win. If he was going down, he was going to take everything with him. And I think this is actually where I'm going to end part 2. I think this is a good place to stop. There's still so much we have to talk about. I'm not even kidding. I think I told you in the last video that I had like 50 pages left of my notes, and I've still got 31 pages left. So this isn't the end. It's not even close. But I'm tired, and I think we could all use a break. So we're going to end here for today. The Gucci story infuriates me to no end. Obviously, I feel like my hair has grown throughout this video with stress, but it's because there's so much that has happened that I've had to leave out for the sake of our time together, but I could literally probably do like a 7-part series. There are stories, fights, characters, and battles that I've had to leave out for the sake of time. And I don't know how it's possible, but it is. Of course it is. I couldn't make this video up if I tried. Anyway, part 3 is going to be just as information-packed, and I'm very excited. I am also really tired, but I'm very excited. Maybe you couldn't tell from this video, but I am. I'm excited. I'm just tired.
I think the thing that bugs me the most about like this story in general and just this family is how entitled they are, and at the same time how stupid they are. Like, it's just a bunch of bratty children. Anyway, I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day or night. I hope you are enjoying the series so far. And as always, please let me know what you think in the comments. I love to hear from y'all. But I think that's going to be it for me today. I promise I'll be back for part 2 really soon. But until next time, I'm Lollie, and this has been great. Bye.